Stance, could you do a roll call for us?
Commissioner Vestibia Shepherd.
Present.
Commissioner Isaac Owens.
Present.
Commissioner Royce Reed Sr. Vice Chair Wesley Rainey.
Here.
Chairman Joshua Darisaw.
Okay, first on our agenda is going to be public hearing on House Bill 581. Oh yeah, excuse me. Is there approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Call for a vote. Okay. Approval of the agenda. So moved. All right.
Sir, did you vote aye?
I did. I voted aye as well. Yeah. First on the agenda is going to be a public hearing on House Bill 581.
Yes, and Mr. Vice Chairman, I will give a quick overview before we open it up to the public. Good morning. I would like to give a brief overview on House Bill 581. Okay. All right. As you all know, in November, the voters on the ballot, the voters had the option to vote yes or no for one of the questions that was on the ballot, and it was regarding House Bill 581. Basically, it mentioned a floating homestead exemption. A lot of voters read the question but did not go and look at the House bill, and a lot of the voters did. And so what we want to do today is just to provide an overview so you all will understand this House bill, because there's way more information and impacts of that bill than what was listed on the ballot. And so House Bill 581 provides for several significant changes impacting local government revenue, and that is the budget that is passed by this city commission in terms of revenues generated to fund operations. So counties and cities must understand these changes and be prepared to make critical decisions that will have lasting impact. So House Bill 581 has three major components. The bill provides for some procedural changes to property tax assessments and appeals. The bill provides for a new statewide homestead exemption that applies to local governments unless the local government affirmatively opts out, which is an option that is in this bill. And the bill creates a new local option sales tax available to be used for property tax relief. If a jurisdiction elects not to opt out of House Bill 581 homestead exemption, they will not have an opportunity to opt out in the future and will have the homestead exemption forever. There may be a method to remove such jurisdictions in the future, but it will require a change to general law or a constitutional amendment by the legislature. So a city, counties and cities, they have the option to stay in, or they can opt out. However, if the local government, if they do not opt out, then that means that cap that is placed on the city, county, in terms of property tax revenue, it will remain the same. And later in the PowerPoint, I will provide information to you all what happens if the FLOST fails, and then if the General Assembly, if they do not approve a future FLOST. If a local government opts out of floating House Bill 581 floating homestead exemption, and the legislative delegation disagrees with that decision, and the legislative delegation for Cordele is Senator Summers and Representative Noah Williams. The local delegation can pass a local act to impose a floating homestead exemption within the jurisdiction, which would be subject to a 2/3 vote in the General Assembly and approval by voters in a local referendum. Now, an option that is in this bill is FLOST, which is a floating local option sales tax. A new sales tax that can be levied up to 1% and collected countywide. Funds are split between the county and the city based upon an intergovernmental agreement and used for property tax relief. Again, the FLOST is an additional 1% tax, and it must be approved by voters in a referendum. So if the city and county decide, hey, we're going to stay in, we can, we have the option of a FLOST that will be placed on the ballot for the voters to either approve or not approve that referendum. So if the voters do not approve the referendum, that's the additional 1% tax, then again, the city and county will be capped at a certain level of revenue that we can never go back, because once we opt in, you can't opt out. And once you opt out, you can't opt in. It's forever. Okay? Also, with this House Bill 581, the taxes do not disappear. They only shift. So even though, we said we're going to opt in and the homestead is at a certain exemption, the taxes do not appear. They will shift to other areas. And in this instance, they will be shifting to other property tax, which would be commercial, agricultural, industrial, and residential non-homestead. Again, if FLOST is passed and the local delegation does not approve the renewal, or the voters do not renew it, then the most likely outcome is an increase in the millage rate. And since FLOST is a sales tax being used to offset property tax, if it expires, then the local government will have to cut expenses, raise property taxes, or some combination thereof. And so with this House bill, if FLOST is approved, it's only for 5 years. So after 5 years, the General Assembly at the Capitol in Atlanta, they could either decide to renew it, which the voters would have to approve it again, or to not renew it. And so those are some of the open-ended concerns, regarding this bill. Is one, it's only for 5 years. So what happens after 5 years? And especially if the voters do not approve the 1% tax. So again, after 5 years, if there's no approval by the voters, if there is not a renewal at the state level with the General Assembly, then again, we are capped at a certain revenue. And again, as you can see, we will have to, raise property taxes, cut expenses, or a combination thereof. And so I do have information that is available to you all, so that you can take with you to read up on this House bill. Also, in addition to this public hearing, we have 2 additional public hearings scheduled on February the 4th at 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. Again, I encourage you to take this information with you, read through it, get an understanding for yourself. And then, again, we have 2 more public hearings. So if you take this information, have questions, please feel free to call us, or, come to the next meeting, with additional questions or information. Yep. And with that, Mr. Vice Chair, that's what I have.
Okay. Thank you, City Manager. Angela, ready? At this time, I'm going to open for public comments. Does anyone have any public comments or questions they would like to ask? Yes, sir.
If the voters voted.
I'm sorry, could you state your name and address? Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
I'm Harold Perry. I'm a concerned citizen, property owner in the city of Cordele. And my concern is if we voted for House Bill when it was on the ballot in November, if people voted for it and the county accepted it, why won't the city accept it? I mean, I understand what the PowerPoint that she just put out that, you know, you locked in, but right now the taxes are going up anyway.
Would you like to
I
respond?
can provide some information on that. And again, the city will not make a final decision until after the third public hearing. But some of the concerns again are that it's only for 5 years. And so in year one for the city, just based on the information we received, it will be a small decrease in revenue, but it will gradually increase over the 5 years. And again, at 5-1, the General Assembly, they passed this bill, but they have nothing in place for us after year 5. And so that's a concern because you're giving something or passing something, but then after year 5, what then? You know, and again, as I stated, if revenues are decreasing, and at some point in time, we would have to increase the millage rate, but then also increase property taxes, and then nothing is in place to address that. And so that's part of the reason why. And I will just share with you that for the past few years, the county has had to use fund balance to balance the budget. And last year we used fund balance to balance the budget. That's the rainy day funds for county and cities. So we're already having to do that. And then you put something in place where you're losing revenue every year, but after year 5, there's nothing from the General Assembly that would either continue it or give us some property tax relief. That's part of the main concern.
Okay. I understand that, but my issue is I didn't hear you bring up anything about cost cutting. When you balance a budget, you got to address both.
And
You can't always address bringing in more income because you can bring in more money as long as you're spending more money. But you know, somewhere you got to look at cutting back.
And we did look at that.
You know, I see some of the other things that the city is doing is really a big waste of money when we're contracting stuff out when you should be creating jobs and putting money back into the community. If you create jobs, people can make money, they're going to spend money in the community. I mean, that generates revenue. So I haven't heard anything about cost cutting. I haven't heard anything about nothing but raising revenue, and that's been going on for the last few years anyway. And you're still not getting enough money to meet your goal from what I'm hearing from you.
No,
But every year for the last 4 years, my property taxes have went up every year for the last 4 years. When is it gonna stop? That's my point. We're gonna continue to raise taxes. If you don't find it one way, you just showed on the PowerPoint, it's gonna be another way. So you're still gonna raise the taxes. So it needs to slow down. We need to look at cost cutting somewhere.
And your property tax increases based on the assessed value of your home. Now,
That's another way to raise taxes.
Yeah, I don't remember if you attended any of our budget hearings, but we had to look at cutting expenses. So that's always part of the process. And some things you have to contract out. If you don't have the skill set for it, you have to contract it out. And some things we are required to contract it out. When we receive funding, grant funding, we have to follow the guidelines for those grants, and it is to put out a bid for an engineer, whatever is needed for that particular grant project. We're required to do that. But I do understand, what you're saying in terms of, creating jobs as well.
All right, thank you.
I think Ms. Vesta would like to respond.
One thing is the county does the assessment on the property, not the city, am I right?
That's correct.
So we gotta go by what they provide for us. And that's my one concern, so we have no, if the county fee probably $300,000, then we got to base it on what they say.
I think it's very important for us to talk about benefits and disadvantages of this bill. The advantages of this bill is you have the if factors. You have no intergovernmental agreement in place at this time. And you also do not know if the 1% FLOST would pass on a referendum. You also have the fact that it's a 5-year deal, which FLOST is a 6-year deal, but it's renewable. Nobody knows if the FLOST is renewable, but we know SPLOST is renewable. So most of what I just said are disadvantages. Now, let's take the if factors in place. You already have the lost. There's an 8% tax that we're currently paying, and the lost is one of the 1% that's being paid. All right, so the lost has an intergovernmental agreement with the city, the county, and Araby, which is 49%, 49%, and 2. So 49% to the city, 49% to the county, and 2% to Araby. So on your city tax bill, if you look at what the lost helped you on your taxes, you'll see the millage rate to obtain the city budget is 20 point something mils. I can't remember it off the top of my head. You receive a reduction of 9.2 mils, which takes us to 11.060 that your home value is assessed at, and that's the millage rate that is computed at. Now let's take the FLOST. If the FLOST passed, if the intergovernmental agreement was the same as the LOST, you would receive an additional 9.24 mil reduction on your city taxes, which means the city millage rate would be like 1.7 mils. Now that computes to a tremendous savings to you. In the county, on your county tax bill, their millage rate is like 10 point something mils, and it would reduce an additional 3.31 mils, which would lower the county millage rate to like 7 mils. So you would receive a tremendous reduction on your property taxes. My savings when I looked at my tax bill on my home is $1,900 in savings. It would save me. So there are benefits to this House bill. Now, there are 3,200 homes in Chris County that have homestead exemption. We need to first understand that those are the 3,200 homes that receive that cap only. Your second homes, your agricultural land, your commercial, your rental property, everything else does not receive that cap. So it's only the homestead exempted homes. The Georgia Department of Revenue is going to set an index. It might be 2, it might be 3, it might be 5. We don't know. But those 3,200 homes can still increase. And it's not like your assessed value is capped and it will never go up. It can go up a little bit, but it just can't go up tremendously. You receive that cap. The main advantage to this is industrial, commercial, residential, second homes. Everybody receives that millage rate reduction because it's based upon the revenue that is collected. Now, SPLOST, our last SPLOST negotiation was for $2.7 million is the projected amount that 1% would bring in. None of us know exactly to the dollar how much the 1% would bring in, but that money is what is divided by the LOST agreement, the 49, 49, and 2. So the FLOST would basically, that is probably the best number that anybody can estimate how much revenue the 1% would bring in. And based on that, the Chamber of Commerce and everybody's always said that 70% of that revenue comes off of the interstate. So that computes to 70% would help offset our property taxes in this community. So I'm not saying that there's a lot of if factors to this bill, but we need to look at everything, the advantages and disadvantages. The 5 years is for 5 years, if everything passed, if the intergovernmental agreement was good, if the referendum passed and we had the 1%, this community would benefit greatly with reductions, because the 1% sales tax has never underperformed in this community. It's, to my knowledge, never underperformed. It's always overperformed. Plus, we've had additional truck stops and everything that's going to generate sales tax revenue. There's a lot of advantages. But, like Miss Angela said, at the end of 5 years, there's the problem. If that went away and people were used to receiving that discount on their homestead, it could go away, and your local governments would have to increase the millage rate to offset that loss. That's the real problem. If we all knew that this was renewable, I don't think anybody would be questioning FLOST, whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. I don't think anybody would question it. Statistically speaking, the 1% sales tax have always passed in this community. But there's no guarantee on that, and there's no guarantee on the intergovernmental agreement, and there's no guarantee on the five years. I hope I explained or helped.
You did.
Plus also our school system will lose tremendously. The public school system will lose, because they're not even included in making a decision on this. It's gonna be the local government. And so if the school lose some of their benefits, our children are gonna suffer. And that's one of my main concerns as well.
Okay.
And sir, after talking to some of the legislators in that, man, I don't think they understand it.
Based
I
on
talked my money out there,
that's what we just said.
and they don't understand it. That gives me a feel. If they can't explain it to me, how can I explain everything to you?
And one of the biggest questions that was posed to them during the time of talking to them was what would be the effect at the end of that 5 year, and they have no thought as to what would be the next thing. And that's scary when you talk about us in small municipalities like ours, because then we will wind up, we're complaining, we're having to pay more now, but at the end of that, when you're talking about, it's not even a double, in most cases it's going to be triple, and then we will be dealing with people that we look at now saying, how come you allowed us to get into this situation? And that's the side of it that I think, going back to what Commissioner Rainey just said, that if the people who proposed it, would have had a plan, but they can't even give us a thought, and that was the most startling thing to me, because the bells and whistles of it, great, because that's what we all hear, saving at this point. But down the road, we're going to be looking at these same people, and then we also have to think about, it's only for those 3,200 homes that are declared homestead. That's another point. A good number of people in our community rent homes. So therefore, if I'm not getting the tax relief on my rental property, I'm increasing the rent that the people who are living in those rental properties will be paying. And then we got a whole nother issue, because then we already talked about rent is skyrocketing in our community, or we don't have adequate homes. So that's a whole nother, because you'll get the tax relief in the house that you live in, but your rental property, there are people that have 3 and 4 homes that they rent, and they won't get it there. So therefore, in order to supplement that, they're going to raise rent, and then we're going to have a whole nother ball, another game we'll be talking about there. So and I think the uncertainty is what bothered me more than anything. They cannot give us a clear answer.
So we do have a difference of opinion on that. That millage rate reduction, the one when it reduces from 11.06 and you get a 9.2 mil reduction to 1.7, that's on all property.
Yeah.
That's on all property. So rental property, second homes
That
do get a reduction on that. They just don't receive the cap,
Right.
the consumer price index cap.
Right.
But but it does bring the price down on those homes. So I promise you this, if somebody is renting something and that owner's property taxes go up, their rent's gonna go up. So if it can be reduced, it's a good thing.
And Mr. Perry, also this is statewide. So, you know, you can Google, you know, and it would tell you there are a lot of cities and counties that are opting out of this. And again, and their voters approved it too, but again, it's the uncertainty, you know, as to what happened after 5 years because the General Assembly, they can't tell us anything. So, you know, we don't know what will happen, but, you know, a lot of your cities and counties are opting out.
In the policy meeting, people volunteer to tell me, yeah, we are not Savannah, the whole Chatham County, you know.
Yeah,
I got people just telling me, you know, and especially the Board of Education, there is no Board of Education that I can continue to say, yes, y'all please do it for us. You know what I'm saying? I mean, people in the smaller towns and the rural areas gonna be more affected than the urban and suburban, areas.
Because they have different streams of revenue, whereas we don't.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, sir. I hope we made it clear for you because it wasn't that clear to us in Atlanta.
Is there any other public comment? Would anybody else have anything? Okay. Does any commissioners have anything they'd like to say?
Let's say we thank you all. I would just like to say thank you all for showing interest in your local government and coming out this morning to live along.
And please share this information that you got here. Share it with, share it because I think that so many people have yet to really read into it and they've gotten the surface of it, but when you read more into it, it's not as clear cut as everyone has proposed it to be.
If there's nothing else, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned.